Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of my podcast, Refining Rhetoric. I'm Robert Bortins, your host. In today's episode, I'll interview Leigh Bortins, my mom and founder of Classical Conversations, and do a brief overview of some of the tools of learning. Finally, Will McCreary will dive into an introduction of cryptocurrency. So let's get started.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortins, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Refining Rhetoric podcast. This is episode 2. I'm your host, Robert Bortins. And today I'm happy to have Leigh Bortins, the founder of Classical Conversations, and of course, my mom on the show today. Leigh is best known for her ability to demystify the fundamental tools of learning. Her efforts since 1983 have helped launch the home-centered learning educational movement. A mother of 4 boys, Leigh has written several books, including The Core, The Question, and The Conversations, as well as curriculum guide for parents and homeschool tutors across the world. Leigh now resides in her North Carolina home and is currently working on developing a math curriculum that maps the structure of learning K-4 through 12 math from a classical Christian perspective. Without further ado, let's start the conversation with this homeschooling pioneer and my mother, Leigh Bortins. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Robert. This is going to be fun. I think it's our first one together.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Of course, we've both been on other people's shows individually, but I'm excited to have you on today, and I'm sure we'll get together again in the future. But for our audience, I just want to start off. How do you define classical education?
Well, I finally have an elevator pitch. It's so foreign to the modern mind, and it can take a long time to explain it. But I'm going to use some words. I'm going to say grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And I know a lot of our listeners don't really know what that means. So think of this natural way of learning where you input information into your brain using the senses God gave you. That's grammar, and whatever meets you through your senses. And then you think about it. Well, that's the dialectic. So you're asking questions and processing that information. And then there's rhetoric. That's what you do with that information. And so one of the things that I think is really important to emphasize that the difference between classical education and modern education is that as our children and our students become older, we less and less hand them books and things full of information for them to learn. And we more start to give them blank pieces of paper and say to them, tell us what you know. And we begin to flip the process from a childlike education to more adult education, where their opinions are respected after having been trained in how to think logically and process difficult literature, as well as just enjoy the banter of words and understanding that the Word made flesh, Christ, is our model in all things we do. So grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric with the goal of having our students actually one day be able to explain the things they're passionate about to other people.
That's great. I recently wrote on LinkedIn, most educational systems have students learn what scientists think or read about science. But at Classical Conversations, our approach is to empower parents and children to take part and be scientists. And I think that's what you're talking about from a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, so we want our children not just to read Homer, but to write like Homer. Or we want them not to just, be scientists that can discover the genome like Francis Collins. We want them to be able to think like he does and think of novel things that have not been ever done before, because they're so ingrained in first principles and they're able to just process information really well. And I think in this day and age with so many things that are just argumentative in an ugly way, it's really a beautiful thing to teach somebody to argue from first principles and to consider ideas and to not always be beating up the person behind those ideas. Just to be less emotional and more rational when we're encountering something new. So thinking like a skilled person rather than just about the skilled person.
That's great. I gave my opinion on what it was like starting Classical Conversations from a high school and college student perspective. But I know our audience would like to hear from you. What were the circumstances around starting classical conversations? What really happened?
Well, I had two sons I loved with all my heart. And as they were getting older, they were middle school when we started down this process. We'd been homeschooling for quite a while. And I noticed a couple of things. One was that they were beginning to lose their homeschool friends to school systems because my friends, their friends' parents, just weren't confident about homeschooling through high school. I also noticed that the classical approach really required more dialectics and rhetoric, and I wanted you and John to have that opportunity to have peers meet with you regularly so that you could, press into ideas, not just with your mother and father, but also with students who were the same age as you, and just to have other people you respected enjoy academics. You were always such a really good student, and you were willing to do the work that was required. And I knew that it would be more interesting for you if you had a peer group that you met with. But I didn't want you to be meeting somebody 5 days a week and send you off to school. And so your dad's the one that said, well, let's just start having families in and let's work with them on the dialectic and rhetoric skills. And of course, I don't think we really knew what we were talking about. We just knew those words from classical books that we had read. And so it was really quite almost a miracle that your dad said that, because, he's a little shyer than I am. And the fact that he saw this need for you guys to show how much he loved you. And so it was funny, prophets without honor in their own country. So our first few families were actually our friends that participated. It wasn't until the second year where they kind of said, oh, I guess Leigh's serious. We really should be doing something about high school and classical education. So I was going to ask you, do you remember that first year when Mrs. Key brought Jonathan over to be with us and she would babysit William in the house while we had all the students in the basement?
I remember there was 11 of us, but I don't know that I was the most astute student at that time. So,
well, Cynthia was always upstairs with John and your brother, little baby brother William, while we were downstairs working on our the various material that we started with. And then, of course, John joined us the next year, and as I got a friend of mine to also direct. So Carrie Pippins was our first person to join us as a director, and she worked with John's age group while I continued with yours. And we just, iron sharpened iron. She was a smart woman and was really interested in classical education, but more importantly, Christian education. So she was just a real asset. And then as we continued to grow as families in the first couple of years in CC, it was interesting. Myself and Judy Morales and Don Blackburn and some of the other moms that were with us right from the beginning, we started having these more babies. And we realized that as great a job as we did with our big kids, that there was a lot more things that we could have done to prepare them for a classical education. So we met upstairs in the living room one day a week when you guys weren't in challenge, so a different day of the week, and we worked out the foundations program. What were the things that we had just wished that we had done a better job, in your education and John's education and their older children's education, and kind of came to a consensus that the classical model really emphasized memorization and grammar, and that was a place where we'd all been weak. And so we put together the foundations program, choosing material from the challenge program to make sure our next set of children were a little more prepared.
That's great. Yeah, so you guys weren't experts. You were just kind of a couple moms figuring it out, which I think will resonate well with our listeners, because you don't need to be an expert to dive in at classical education or at classical conversations, because you've got that group of moms and dads that have that same goals that you have of educating your children in the way that they should go. Now, I was in college when I got a phone call from you telling me that I had to pay for college myself because Classical Conversations was, you were going to try to make it a sustainable organization that helped a lot of people. So how did that come about? And when you made that decision, what was your vision at that time?
Well, things have gone pretty well for you and for John and a number of the other families that started with us in that first 2 years. And in the county, we were in the few of us who had started CC together, the majority of our older children had gotten really decent scholarships into really good schools, and word got out. And people were saying, well, that's why I was homeschooling. I want my children to be able to go to good colleges. And, that's not real important to us now. But at that time, we kind of had to prove ourselves to the world that we could do this. And so it was just interesting that because we were doing so well with our own children, you guys were such good models. A number of you were at large churches that had big youth groups, and other parents were coming to us and saying, we want our kids to be like your kids. And that's really what they were saying. We want them to be as literate as you are. We want to know that they can get to colleges. We heard you do science experiments together and put on plays together. And so at the end of the first 3 years, we had almost 300 people on a waiting list. And that's when your dad says, you know what, I'll quit work and we'll try to make classical conversations something that can support our family. And so that's why you got that phone call that said, Robert, you're on your own now, pay your own bills, you're all grown up. Your dad and I are starting a new adventure. And you dug right into that and found people to pay for your education. So thanks.
It was an adventure for sure. And I think just thinking back about my youth group and how many of those individuals are either homeschooling or homeschooling with classical conversations or even directing today. So, I think that's amazing, that impact that we had. Mm-hmm. And so, what has changed in homeschooling since you started? Like what have you seen in homeschooling parents and in children and curriculum?
Yeah, so there's really nothing new under the sun. There's still parents who love their children. There's parents who feel confident in academics. There's parents who don't feel confident. We're all part of the body of Christ, and we're told to support and to help one another. And so the thing that I see as a change is when I first started homeschooling, because we were pioneers, and it's not that we didn't do things together, we did, but we weren't as intentional in building homeschooling community as I see homeschoolers now. They're really looking for somebody to do this with. They don't want lone school. They want homeschool, where they base things from their house and they go out and, just are aware that there's symphonies to join and drama clubs and sports teams. And, when we first started with you, I had friends who still were having their children taken from them by the government because homeschooling was against the law. Fortunately, because you guys were pretty young when we started working on homeschooling, by the time it was a problem for you, for truancy, our state had changed the law, and so our lobbying had worked. So there was a lot of fear in one sense, and then self-sufficiency, because that's the way you had to be. Versus now, I think more and more people just are so grateful when they can homeschool with a friend.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people don't know that homeschooling wasn't legal in every single state until 1993. So it's a relatively new right that's been recognized by the government, obviously always recognized by God. But it was a right that we did have to fight for, and a right that could be taken away.
Doesn't end, does it?
No, it never ends. What would you say to a parent who are in the thick of homeschooling and maybe feeling discouraged? Spring's upon us, but not quite here yet.
Well, a lot of people get the winter blahs, and, it's not just the winter blahs. We all get into just kind of rhythms where things aren't going as well as other, weeks and other months. And so I just want to remind parents that life's not an even keel, right? There's ups and there's downs, and just be sure you're not making a decision when you're really riding high or when you're really down in the dumps, because you normally don't make such a great decision. And so if you're feeling like you want to stop homeschooling, I would say go have coffee with a friend, go make a play date with the little kids in another homeschool family, and pray. And then just remind yourself that you're doing this to honor God and to help your children know Him and make Him known. And if you always were doing excellent and we went really well, you wouldn't need them. Homeschooling parents homeschool, in my mind, so you can learn how much you need the Lord and how dependable He is. And if everything always went well, we just wouldn't have the opportunity to learn that. And so I'm just really grateful for the families that hang in there And just I want to remind those that don't feel like they can hang in there that there's people for you that, Class Conversations website or your local community. Don't try to do it alone, and don't try to make big decisions when things are going really, just not as well as normal. The other thing is, remember, your children have growth cycles, and sometimes things are going badly, maybe academically, because their bodies are growing and they're unable to pay as much attention to their academics. Or it might be, they're going through middle school hormones and their brains are foggy. And so they're fighting back and they're arguing because they're learning that their bodies are changing and they don't have quite the self-control they used to have. Well, it'll come back. For that learning is not linear, life's not linear, and that tomorrow's a new day and his mercies are new. So go to bed tonight asking the Lord for forgiveness and wake up in the morning excited to find out what he has for you tomorrow.
That's great. So Classical Conversations is getting ready to celebrate our 25th anniversary. What do you see that Classical Conversations does, or our programs or philosophies that set us apart from other homeschooling programs?
Well, I'm on tour right now, and I'm on my way to Georgia, and I'm actually discussing that very question. So if you go into our current catalog on page 5, there's a page that talks about our mission and our vision and the things that we believe. And the main difference, I would say, compared to any other program is our focus on knowing God and making him known. That if we don't believe the purpose of education is to know God and make him known, we'll never focus as hard as we should on the freedoms of being Christians. And we want our children and ourselves to be free indeed. And so the ninth, we believe, refers to the responsibilities of Christian freedom. And so for us, that's the main reason we have Classical Conversations and our children in the program. We're going to use math and Latin and science and community and parent-child relations to see all the ways that the Lord helps us to know him and to make him known so that we can eventually do like we're told in the Gospels and go forth into Jerusalem, Samaria, and the rest of the world to share the gospel. And we're not going to do that very well if our education doesn't prepare us for it. So you don't know who you're going to be speaking to at any time. And Paul tells us to be all things for all people. And part of the liberal arts classical education is to prepare children so that they never feel excluded from any forms of human endeavor, so that they can share the gospel with anybody, anywhere. And, they're children when they leave us. They still need more experience to be able to do that. But that is our main goal. And we recognize that as Homo sapiens, people who think, as well as Homo adorans, people who worship, we need to have our children prepared well, both in mind and spirit, as well as body.
That's great. Well, I know everyone's super excited about Math Map, and it's still a little ways away, but how is that development coming along in your mind? What can you share with our audience?
So the first thing I'd like to share is there's a sample of the Math Map already on CC Connected, and I want to encourage every one of you to go get that. And I'll explain a little bit more about it in a second, but get it and work through it now. And what it's called is College Notation for Kindergartners. So what we've provided for you is at the kindergarten level, a workbook of all the notation and symbols and vocabulary that you would need to know in order to really help a high school student do well at math. And so if you don't think you're really great at math or you want to be better at teaching math, we've given you this workbook that's at a first grade level. We call it a kindergarten, but, that age range. And I suspect if you're good at math, it'll take about 5 hours to work through it. And if you're not so good at math, it might take you about 30 hours to get through it. But it will prepare you for whatever math curriculum you end up using. If you leave CC, you're going to know a lot more about how to teach math to your children. So go get prepared. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are piloting it on a larger scale this fall. And if the pilot goes well, that means in 2023, it'll be available for our Challenge A students. But remember, we have to pilot it first. So we're hoping it'll all go well, and then we'll be able to launch it immediately. But give us a little grace on that date. And meanwhile, look at the current math curriculum that we have on the CC Connected. So that's kind of logistics of what's going on. As far as the philosophy, we've written a math curriculum that is for the one family schoolhouse, so that each week, not only the parent that's homeschooling maybe a handful of children, but also your entire community is working on the same math concepts. Because just like when I say John 3:16, for God to love the world, you can go on with that verse. We want math to be so familiar to all of us and to be such a community event that if I was to say to you, go to week 8, page 4, you would be able to tell me what kind of math problems were on that page. Because every year, year after year, the math curriculum is mapped in such a way that it's so repetitive that you always know what's coming next. And, knowing in general what's happening is the first thing to breaking down fear and anxiety. And so we want the curriculum that we're working on to be presented to both parents and children in a way that they become super familiar with what's expected of them every year. So that's kind of one of the main goals of the curriculum.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea of having the community be able to have that conversation. And when we have other math curriculums or people are doing a bunch of different math curriculums, right? We don't have that ability to discuss with one another, especially at different levels like you would in history, or that we do commonly as adults and as children. What are you hearing from those local pilot programs you mentioned in the feedback?
Yeah, so we haven't done our big pilot, but we've had almost 3 years of little pilots where we worked with just some communities nearby in North Carolina, so we could provide as much help as possible. And one of the things that I find really encouraging is around March, when the parents are signing up for the next challenge that are in these pilots for Math Map, they're all asking us, can we have it next year, even though we won't be in a pilot? And that's a big turn from the first few weeks when they start with the Math Map. They're very apprehensive. It feels so new and different to them. And, they're not really sure that they're going to be able to, to understand it and embrace it. And so to see that switch happen every year over the 6 to 7 months that they're working on it has been really gratifying. And then I didn't know this was happening, and I want to encourage, I just learned about it. I want to encourage every challenge director to think about this. Some of the challenge directors have been going on and getting the college notation for kindergarten book and looking at that week's topic and finding problems out of Saxon math that address the topic that they would be doing if it was in Math Map. So they're getting the students prepared for this idea of having everyone working on the same concept each week. And then the other thing is each of the units that's with the Math Map has artwork and an exordium with it. And a lot of the challenge tutors are opening up with the artwork and exordium so that the students can start to see how math helps you to see the unseen. And that's the gift mathematicians have, is they can see things other people can't see. And of course, Scripture tells us that's the rule, or that's one of the privileges of a Christian, is that there's mysteries revealed to us that other people don't know. And so math is such a good example of a subject area where people who study it, they know things in a different way than the average person. And we want to invite all Christian families into knowing how the world works through mathematics.
That's awesome. I know it's going to be exciting. I'm glad that my children will be able to go through it. I know that, at least in the U.S., math is one of those scary subjects for a lot of people. And a lot of people say that they're not good at math, but a lot of it might be because of how math was taught to them and how the curriculums are laid out. And this is going to be a new way to think and work through math that is classical and hasn't been done in a long, long time. So you're hoping fall of 23, maybe if you're a listener, you should, maybe think 2024 and then hope for 2023. But I know people are going to be super excited about Math Map, and it's really going to be a game changer for families with a lot of children, being able to work on the same concept, whether you're in kindergarten or 5th grade and 9th grade, and children being able to help, their siblings out and even to go back and review and know where to go get the answer if you're stuck on a week or an idea, because it's mapped out for you. And so it's an aptly named program. Well, thank you for being on the show with me today, Mom, and all that you're accomplishing on behalf of homeschooling community and the hundreds of thousands of people that you have blessed with your faithfulness to the Lord, even if it made it so I had to sleep in closets in college. But
yeah. Like David says, when people ask him about classical approach, he'll say, "Yeah, I don't even know what that is. My mother was too busy helping you." Right.
Yeah.
But it's been so fun having you four. And, my greatest joy, is, of course, is that you all walk with the Lord. But the second is that you all read books avidly. So thank you for following through as grown men.
Thanks, Mom, for all the sacrifices that you did, things that you could have done differently, if you had decided not to homeschool. So we appreciate that. Schoolhouse Rocked, The Homeschool Revolution is a feature-length documentary that will break down common misconceptions about homeschooling, empower new families to homeschool, and equip those already homeschooling to do it with excellence. The film follows host Yvette Hampton as she travels the country with her family, meeting other homeschoolers and educational experts, including yours truly, to learn the secrets of successful homeschooling and tell the story of the millions of people who have been impacted by the homeschool revolution. To find out more, visit classicalconversations.com/rocked today. Wow, I just love talking to my mom and seeing things through her eyes. In every episode, we're going to review examples of the trivium, the 5 core habits of grammar, the 5 common topics of dialectic, and the 5 canons of rhetoric to help you learn how to listen for these ideas and use them in your own homeschooling and in your own life. So the first, the 5 core habits of grammar that I want to review is storytelling. And Leigh shared how scary it was to homeschool in the early days and why her and my dad decided to start classical conversations. And I just loved how approachable that is, because even for myself and my family, even though we're homeschool veterans, doesn't mean that it's not scary sometimes and you don't know what you're doing. And it's always good to homeschool with a friend. In the 5 common topics of dialectic, she used definition. She defined what classical education means to her and how she looks at it, which may be a little bit different than other organizations. And then she used the tool of comparison and discussed how classical conversations is different from other programs in the marketplace. And finally, the 5 canons of rhetoric. We heard Leigh use the tool of elocution when she shared how math helps you see the unseen, and in a similar way, being a believer helps you see the unseen spiritually speaking. And so these tools, and of course others, were used in this episode, but we want to practice listening for these and using them in our own life. And so these are the ones I wanted to call attention to today. And we'll call attention to a different one after the next episode. Up next, you'll hear from Will McCreary. He is a close friend, a colleague, and a Classical Conversations graduate. Are you looking for the perfect books to read aloud with the whole family? Senators of Rome and Exploring the Heavens with Uncle Paul are 2 of the newest releases in the Copper Lodge Library series that have been designed to accompany Foundation Cycle 2 content. If you love learning about science, history, and how they work together in God's greater plan, these books are for you. Find them in the Classical Conversations bookstore.
Welcome to 5 Minutes of Crypto with Will. In these short segments, we're going to dive into cryptocurrency. Some of you may already understand crypto. Some of you might own and trade it, but the vast majority don't know what it is. You've probably seen it in the news. Maybe it's annoying. Maybe it's destabilizing, but I'm here to help you get a little leg up, learn about it, and start understanding what it is, why you should care, and even if you don't care, why you may want to understand it. In every 5-minute segment, we'll take a classical trivium approach and look as we define digital assets and cryptocurrency. A quick 20 seconds on me. My name's Will McCreary. I was a student in Classical Conversations. I've worked in classical education now for the last 5 years. I have a 4-year degree in business. I was very, very close to getting my 4-year in finance. I have owned and traded Bitcoin since 2017. I'm a big crypto fan. But there's so much confusion around this subject. And funny story that we laugh about now, I just use this as kind of like a catalyst story because there's so much confusion. My sweet grandmother a couple years ago was just being thoughtful, creating conversation with me. And then she paused and I didn't know what she was trying to say. She didn't even know how to start. And she was finally like, Will, tell me about your cyber money interests. She did not know what to call it or how to define it, as many of us don't. But when we break it all down and we look at the grammar of what blockchain technology is, by the way, blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, all the same thing. It's defined as a DLT, a distributed ledger, keyword ledger technology. And walking away from this short segment today, remember this: blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, it's all a digital ledger. What do ledgers do? When folks think of ledgers, they probably remember their accounting 1 and 2 course in college, where you manually keep a log of your transactions, your subledgers, keep track of payroll, cash, inventory, receivables. And the summary of those amounts would be transferred manually to a general ledger. And looking at a ledger at its core, ledgers bring order from chaos. We all need that, especially when it comes to finance. In my parents' generation, balancing a checkbook, that's a ledger system, right? It brought order to their financial outlook. Ledgers are good. They bring accountability. They bring order. When something is organized and tracked well, growth can take place after that. So what is cryptocurrency? It's a digital ledger. Dialectically, you're like, so Will, it's been defined. We know what it is. Give me the reason why, the dialectic. Give me a reason to care about this. Well, in 1 Chronicles 12, the Bible talks very favorably about the sons of Issachar because they knew and understood the times they were living in. Whether or not we care, digital ledger technology is getting adopted so fast. China already runs on a cryptocurrency called the digital yuan. Many countries in South America, Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, they've already started aggressively adopting these technologies. And the Middle East is making big moves in this space. In my opinion, and I've studied this now for a few years in depth, cryptocurrency can be a very good thing. For example, if you're asking for dialectic and why reason to care, think about it. If the supply of a digital asset is fixed, like Bitcoin, can a centralized body, government, or a centralized bank manipulate or print the supply? The answer is no. And that's really just the start of the positives. There are also dangers and a lot of negatives. I think all of us realize that the United States dollar isn't backed by anything anymore. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took us off of the gold standard back in 1933, at least that was the first phase, the dollar wasn't backed by a precious metal like gold. It wasn't. It was backed and started to be backed by good faith. The dollar is now an idea. It has utility, but it's not backed by utility. Fiat currency is defined as money by decree, money by someone saying this is money, this is currency. It's government issued. Fiat money gives central banks greater control over the economy because they control the supply. Does the dollar have a built-in integrity and accountability system? The answer is no. Thanks for listening today. Hopefully I was able to capture some of your interest, even if you previously didn't care about crypto at all. After today, you should be able to answer the big question our culture is trying to answer. What is cryptocurrency? And you now know. Cryptocurrency is a digitally encrypted, protected ledger. Join me next time on 5 Minutes of Crypto with Will as we dig into the history, utility, and beginnings of Bitcoin. God bless.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning into episode 2. As you know, we have 3 episodes dropping on today. If you haven't listened to episode 1, it's a monologue where I talk about just what this podcast is all about. So go check that one out. And episode 3 with Mike Sharrow, CEO of C12. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go download it and share it with your friends. Thank you so much. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortins. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.